Back to In Focus on Newzroom Afrika, channel 405. A Sudanese court has ordered that internet services be reconnected, but despite Tuesday's ruling, most of the country has remained disconnected for the past 2 weeks. Now, it follows a military takeover late last month, disbanding the government, declaring a state of emergency, and detaining leaders. Since then, online access has largely been blocked, and phone lines have also been intermittently disrupted. At least 14 people have died in nationwide protests since the coup. All right, for more on this now, I'm joined by Dr. Charles Sinkala, who is an Africa Analyst, and to get a sense of what this blackout actually means. Dr. Sinkala, good evening, and thank you very much for your time. Are you surprised at all that 24 hours after the court ruling, at least, the blackout of internet services still continues?
Yes, thank you very much, and good evening to your viewers. Thank you for having me. Yes, it is quite unfortunate that, these tools of the media that's supposed to be used to inform the people are the ones which have been stopped, in terms of containing the situation there in Sudan, and this just escalates the violence.
What does this blackout really mean about, of course, the ongoing attacks, but also about the displaced people and refugees in Sudan?
Look, this is just a dysfunctional government of what is happening there. You remember, they are just coming out of the coup d'etat, which hasn't been recognized. United States of America has suspended the aid to that country, and many other sanctions has come from the Western countries, as well as, for them to return to civilian rule. And this has been the story of the dynamics of war. We must remember that for every war, people do not fight for nothing. They fight for something. And I think the forces of the military, are taking advantage. They should have released the power to the civilian rule immediately after the ousted of al-Bashir, the former president of Sudan. But again, when you talk about the war in that region, the questions that people might ask, who are the beneficiaries from these wars? Who are the beneficiaries from these atrocities and crimes against humanity? As soon as we find out who are the beneficiaries of that, I think we'll start talking of something that can prevent these wars which are happening and which is threatening the peace and security of Africa. So we must also understand that there are those who fund both sides of the wars, and for them, these other countries and the organizations, they actually benefit from these wars, what we are seeing, and in fact, stopping them, like what the United Nations, in conjunction with the AU, that 2020 will be the time to put down the guns, actually simply saying that the militarizing of Africa, especially Sudan, and many others who actually reduce the income for those countries who benefits from these atrocities.
Yeah. Talking about beneficiaries of perpetuating these atrocities, do they continue then to do acts of violation with impunity because of this lack of internet access?
Of course. Where there's war, there's actually what is called sabotage. Here on the program now, you are just talking about ESCOM. ESCOM also has been sabotaged, by those who are pursuing some certain interest in South Africa. We mustn't forget that in South Africa, just before President Zuma left office, he was about to sign the nuclear deal for the power generation. And that's a story which continues. But going back to Sudan, same thing. It's a sabotage. There are people who are trying to make the country ungovernable. They will also make sure that the citizens turns against their leadership. And these are the issues that are happening. The peace accord, which was signed in 2019, immediately after al-Bashir was ousted, the civilian government part with the military government. There's no way you can put the chairman, who's the head of the military, to preside over the transition government. So the pro-political people within the region of Sudan are not having a fair deal. The history of Sudan hasn't had a very good fair deal in terms of coup d'etats and how they can transition to the civilian government and civilian rule.
Yeah. Mediation efforts seemingly having stalled at this particular point. Are there any hopes of them being revived? But also Buhan saying that he is committed to appointing a technocratic cabinet until elections in July 2023. However, it's reported, I mean, up until this point, there is really no cabinet that has been set up.
No, there can't be. I've never heard of any military government or military transition government which has the cabinet. The cabinet can only be with the political will and political power by the civilian government, government of unity, to preside over that. So what is happening is simply lip service in that country, because there's no way they're gonna delay the elections. In fact, the July stated date for the elections is actually too late. People are dying, people are being incarcerated, especially political opponents and the pro-democracy people have been arrested, and many of the things which we cannot see on the media, that happen there in Sudan. Part of the options that they have is one, to not recognize the military coup, which is also suicidal. Because the generals, those who participated in the coup d'etat, they want to be protected in terms of the immunity of the crimes that they have committed of the coup. So there's no way they can back off. Also, they're trying to hold on and to make sure that the civilian government which comes in recognizes them and do not prosecute them if that government comes. Unless there's that guarantee coming from the civilian government or the government to come in Sudan, the military will still hold on power, and making sure that they continue for the search of that immunity that will come from the civilian government.
So does the UN circular make things worse? I mean, it's very clear in that circular that they recognize the government of Hamdok as the legitimate government, and that is something that, the circular says very clearly. And does that in a way limit prospects of negotiation, of mediation, and does it harden the military there?
Yeah, it does, because they'll feel that they are not recognized. Of course, yes, we do not recognize coup d'etats on the continent or anywhere in the world. It's an illegitimate government. But again, for the sake of peace and security within that country and the region, the both parties has to be brought to the table and discuss the way forward. Yes, they took out a coup, which they do not want to accept that it's a coup d'etat. I'm sure a sacrifice has to be made for them to be given that immunity, that they shall not be prosecuted going forward. But again, what precedents are they setting up going forward? This is not the first coup d'etat which has happened in Sudan. So the United Nations, the Peace Security Council, and the AU as well has teamed up. Especially the AU has sent an envoy there, who is the former president of Nigeria, Obasanjo, who's going there to see if he can mediate the peace talks. But that will also be fruitless because of what is happening is so fragile at this stage. And I think what needs to happen is to allow democracy, and the civilian rule to come in that country. And yes, they will have to sacrifice something, for every war, people die. We are not saying people should die there, but if those military wants to be given that immunity, they should be given, and maybe prosecute them afterwards to set a precedence that military coup d'etats are not allowed anywhere in the world, as they bring so much conflict.
Local resistance there, some committees that are forming, albeit very difficult to organize at this particular point because of the internet blackout. How important are they in this equation?
They are quite important. I see that the young people who are taken on to the streets, and the pro-democracy, civil rights organizations, and many human rights organizations has come forth to support the call for the civilian rule. And I think through those protests, I think something will start happening. And I think the only challenge is that if sanctions like now has been given to Sudan, only the poor people who are suffering these sanctions. These sanctions are supposed to be imposed on the generals who took over the country's leadership from the legitimate government of the Prime Minister, as well, like I said, they can't back off also. It is quite unfortunate that they have to move forward and fight towards the last neck and tooth. But, the suspension of the internet in that region will just escalate the violence. It is not bringing up anything. The world now they are seeing, and we see the world leaders as well, they're getting involved, to making sure that there's peace that side. But again, that region is engulfed with so much protests and disunity, especially the Horn of Africa. You must remember, immediately after the Prime Minister Ahmed of Ethiopia was elected, I think he took chance to go around the block there and negotiate with the countries that they should open borders and they should start making pact in terms of military, so that it's the African military. But again, immediately after winning that Nobel Peace Prize, we have problems again in Ethiopia, Eritrea, Sudan, and the surrounding region.
Dr. Sinkala, appreciate your time and thank you very much for joining us tonight here on In Focus.